Minecraft trees. Simple, unrealistic, they look like broccoli. Mojang improved them a bit through the years, but still we can do them better, and today we are going to learn how. Building trees in Minecraft has proven to be a challenge to many, discouraging builders from using one of the best assets that we have to decorate our builds. But why are they so hard? Why is it so difficult to use blocks to create a shape that is organic and full of life? Well, maybe because blocks are quite the opposite, square and dead. Trees in real life are not perfect. They have asymmetries, weird shapes and patterns that may look random, but in reality they tell a story. From the roots, the color of the trunk, a broken branch, or flowers blossoming from the leaves, they all tell the story of the life and growth of that tree. When we build them in Minecraft, we have complete control over where we place each and every block. That level of control makes it difficult for us to imbue our tree with that realistic feel that comes from the randomness and uniqueness of life. We search for patterns, techniques, and methods that we can repeat over and over to guarantee that we will always end with the best result. That works wonderfully for houses and structures, but not for trees. So what do? We give up, turn around and never try again? Of course not. We can still find methods and techniques that allow us to create those imperfections. If we look at a picture of a tree and try to follow it as a reference, we can very quickly realize that it's not that simple. There are too many things going on in the picture, so how can we break this down to make it easier for us? For this, we can take inspiration from drawing. If we take a look at this image from the user Young Art Lab on Pinterest, we can see that they divide the process in 4 stages. So we will do something similar and divide the making of the tree in Minecraft in 3 parts: the trunk, the branches, and the canopy. The trunk is in most cases the easiest part. We can begin with a straight line that determines the height of our tree trunk and then build around it, making it thicker at the base, thinner at the middle, and then thickening a bit at the top. This is a classic shape for a tree trunk, where we can also add some roots coming out at the base, just a few blocks, very simple for now. Of course, we can use other shapes for different trees, but more on that later on. Now we need to begin building the branches. Here, depending on the scale of our tree, we can do different layers. But what do I mean by layers? We can think of the branches as if the tree trunk was splitting up into smaller segments. So, if our trunk is 5 blocks wide, we can have 2 branches of thickness 2 coming out of it, or 4 of thickness 1, or 1 of 2 and 2 of 1. You get the point. How you decide to make the splitting is up to you, and it can vary depending on the tree that you want to build. Just keep in mind that they should always be thinner than the original trunk they come from. Then from each of these branches we can do the same and split again. This would be the second layer, where from a branch of thickness 2 we can have 2 more branches coming out of it of thickness 1 each of them, and so on. However, if our branch is of thickness 1, the splitting of it gets more complicated because we need to use smaller blocks, and for that we have a couple options. The easiest is to use fences. Branching out with fences works wonderfully, as it's very simple to do and it has this pattern in the connection that looks like wooden sticks. Nevertheless, fences work better on more vertical branches, but when you need to go diagonally or horizontally, it's not the best option. That's when we can use a mix of smaller blocks like slabs, trapdoors and walls. And for that, we need to understand how shaping works. We can separate these branches into horizontals and verticals. For the horizontals, we can use a mix of slabs and trapdoors to get something that begins a bit thicker and thins out as we move to the tip of it. If we apply it to the tree, we could get something like this that expands the tree to the sides. Notice that I call them horizontal, but they are not fully horizontal, as that looks weird for most trees. For the more vertical branches, we need to use walls, fences, trapdoors and glass panes, or even copper bars if we want to get fancier. So combining these, I will show you how to get smaller branches that go up vertically. For example, if we get 2 walls and then 2 more walls diagonally, we can connect them using trapdoors here and here. Or we can connect them using glass panes or even the new copper bars. Out of these 3 options, the copper and the glass panes look a bit thicker while the one with trapdoors is a bit thinner. Then if we extend this design and do a step of 3 instead of 2, we can use bars and then trapdoors to get something like that. And even combining the glass panes with the bars at the front, we can get something that looks more solid. And of course, if we need them to be longer, we can extend this one by repeating the pattern and connecting each step in a similar way to maintain the thickness. I like to think of this branch design as a 1.5 thickness, which means that it goes between 2 block branches and 1 block branches. Now, if we need them to be thinner, we can just use trapdoors at both sides of the connections, which is very simple both for a 2-step or a 3-step and so on. This one would be a 0.75 thickness branch, or something close to that. It doesn't really matter. What matters here is that it's a bit less than a full block. For even thinner branches, we can do the same thing, but with fences instead of walls. Just place them diagonally and connect them with trapdoors. Or the thinnest of all would be just using trapdoors in this way. Playing around with all of these, we can get all different kinds of thinner vertical branches for the trees. So now, if we apply this to our tree, a first important point here is to not always do them one next to each other as I showed them before. We can, and I highly recommend, to also shift them diagonally like this and do the connection like that. This will help the tree have more dimension, otherwise it may end up looking flat. That way we can do the connection for one branch, then we do another one a bit thinner here, and if it's easier you can start by just making it flat, and then to make it lean to one side we can just shift each segment 1 block. On the top of this one we can then split again, doing a 2-step to this side, and then the same to the other side. Then we connect them with trapdoors just like that. And from the top of this one, now we can use fences and trapdoors to get the thinner ones going up. This part of the process is the one that takes the longest of time, but also the most important one. With patience and practice, following this method of splitting branches in smaller ones, you can get a shape for your tree that looks realistic. Remember that they don't need to be perfect. Split as many times as you see fit for your tree, add horizontal branches in places where you feel it's empty, and just play around until you are happy with the shape of your branches. If you wanna go the extra step, this is something a bit more advanced but can make your tree look better, and that is using smaller blocks and a similar technique as we do for the shaping of the branches to smooth out the shape of our trunk, the connection of the branches and the roots. Basically adding walls, stairs, slabs, glass panes and trapdoors to polish the shape of the tree is highly recommended. It's not easy, but with a bit of trial and error you can get something that looks better. I always say that if the tree looks good just with the branches, then the tree will look good no matter what you do with the leaves for the canopy. That is, however, only partially true. There are multiple ways to add the leaves to a tree, and there's no really right or wrong. It really depends on the tree style that you want. I will say though that generally there are a few things that you want to avoid. 1. Making the leaves too chunky. In most cases, especially to make the tree look realistic, you want to avoid having clusters of leaves that looks like boxes or full spheres. A good way to break them up is by adding some air gaps in between. 2. Not using enough leaves. On the other extreme, you want to avoid adding leaves scarcely. In general, it is better to be generous and add a good amount, unless you are going for a dead tree look, in which case having few leaves can work better. 3. Covering up all the branches. This is an important one, especially after spending a lot of time designing the branches. If we take a look at drawings or at trees in real life, the beginning of the branches is something that we can see in most cases. So make sure to leave that uncovered, unless you have a specific reason to cover them up. In general, I will say there are 2 methods to add the leaves to a tree by hand. The first one is by going to each tip of the branches and adding blobs of leaves there. This requires a bit of practice and patience. I'm using lime wool as a placeholder block at the moment, and we will see why this is useful later. But for now, let's just focus on the shape. In particular, there's one shape of blobs that I like, which is this sort of lenticular shape, which is basically a half sphere flattened down. To do this, you need to start with an elongated flat base and then make it smaller towards the top. It doesn't need to be perfect, leave some air gaps in between, or even play around with other shapes like full spheres. I also like adding small leaves in diagonals to the sides or going down, but that's just a style preference of mine. This method is great, but it relies heavily on having a good branch system done beforehand, and the end result will vary a lot depending on how you do the blobs. If you want to have a bit more control over the general shape of the canopy, then we can use this second method, where we basically draw the outer outline of the canopy, generally connecting the extreme of the branches or even going further out. This is useful when we are following a reference picture and we want our tree to look more similar to that. So basically we begin drawing lines, connect them in different directions until we kinda have a shape that we like. Then once we have the outline, we just need to begin filling this in. For that we can do something similar to the first method and add blobs with air in between, but just make sure to connect everything and not go beyond the outline that we settled on. So you can see now how different methods give us very different tree styles. Once we have the shape in place, we need to paint it. Beginning with the leaves, something that really helps make the tree look better and more full is using a small leaf gradient. You can change some of these, but this is a solid and basic start. In my case, I will only use these three for the tree from birch to azalea. Then we will go to our tree, and what I like to do is to add some of the birch right underneath the lime wool. Not everywhere, just doing it a bit randomly in lines of 2 generally works really nice. You can think of this as the shadow of the leaves. Then I'm going to skip the oak leaves, and at the top of the lime wool I will add some azalea leaves, in a similar way as before. Maybe these ones can be a bit more sparse and we can even mix in some moss in there. Then at last we will replace the lime wool for the oak leaves. We can do this by hand or by assisting ourselves with tools like Axiom or World Edit. Once that's done, if we use some moss, we can add some grass on top of it to make it look even fluffier. Then if we want, we can also add some color variation to the trunk and branches. In general, a mix of mud and tuff is good, so I will add a bit of that, and that way we get our tree finished. Of course, we can even go an extra step and add floating candles as falling leaves. As for the color of the leaves, you don't need to always use leaf blocks. If you want to achieve a different color, you can use, for example, a yellow gradient like this one. Change the trunk to diorite and pale wood and we can get a more autumn-like looking tree. It's worth mentioning that for certain types of tree, the overall process varies slightly. In particular for spruce or pine trees, even if in concept the process is the same, you can see how the trunk would, for instance, need to be taller and thinner, the branches would need to be more horizontal, and the leaves would follow them from the trunk to the tip. Or for a willow tree, you can start with the same trunk and branches from before, but when it comes to the leaves, we would need to make the blobs elongated in the other direction to give it a droopy effect. Or if you want cherry trees, which tend to have more bonsai shapes, we need to focus more on the curves of the trunk in the first step. Add the branches as usual, and for the leaves, using the blob method with larger clusters will give us a nice looking cherry tree. Conveying movement in Minecraft is a bit tricky, but trees are a great way to create a sense of wind for our landscapes. You can do this as easily as having a regular tree and add floating leaves on a diagonal, just like this. Having all the floating leaves leaning to one side will trick our brain into thinking that the wind is blowing in that direction. Or if you want to get fancier, you can design the trunk from the beginning as if it was being affected by the wind. This is probably the most difficult effect to achieve, and you can assist yourself with candles or floating carpets. But if it's done correctly, the result will be epic. All of this is great for small to medium scale trees. But when they get larger, we need to begin using tools like Axiom or World Edit to speed things up. And even though the process and the steps are very similar, there are some crucial differences which deserve a video of its own. So please let me know in the comments if that's something that interests you, and I can make a video to show you how to apply all this on a larger scale to create some of the trees you've already seen. But for now, that's going to be everything. Condensing my ways of building trees has been a true challenge, so I hope you found the video useful and learned something new today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. This has been Calven, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.